Weight loss solutions are not one size fits all. Hers makes it simpler to get started and stick with a weight loss plan, backed by expert-guided online care that puts your weight loss goals first. These include oral medication kits or compounded GLP-1 injections. Through Hers, pricing for oral medication kits start at just $69 a month for a 10-month plan when paid in full upfront. No hidden fees, no membership fees. You shouldn't have to go out of your way to feel like yourself. Hers brings expert care straight to you with 100% online access to personalized treatment plans that put your goals first. Reach your weight loss goals with help through Hers. Get started at forhers.com/4u to access affordable, doctor-trusted weight loss plans. That's forhers.com/4u, forhers.com/4u. Paid for by Hims and Hers Health. Weight loss by Hers is not available everywhere. Compounded products are not FDA approved or verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. Restrictions at forhers.com apply.
Power up fall projects with Ego at Lowe's. Every tool delivers power beyond belief. So whether it's leaves, limbs, or lawn cleanup, count on Ego to deliver the power, performance, and innovation you need. And now for a limited time, save up to $60 on select blowers, chainsaws, and pole saws. Shop Ego today at Lowe's. Offers valid through 10/1 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Weight loss solutions are not one size fits all. Hers makes it simpler to get started and stick with a weight loss plan, backed by expert-guided online care that puts your weight loss goals first. These include oral medication kits or compounded GLP-1 injections. Through Hers, pricing for oral medication kits start at just $69 a month for a 10-month plan when paid in full upfront. No hidden fees, no membership fees. You shouldn't have to go out of your way to feel like yourself. Hers brings expert care straight to you with 100% online access to personalized treatment plans that put your goals first. Reach your weight loss goals with help through Hers. Get started at forhers.com/4u to access affordable, doctor-trusted weight loss plans. That's forhers.com/4u, forhers.com/4u. Paid for by Hims and Hers Health. Weight loss by Hers is not available everywhere. Compounded products are not FDA approved or verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. Restrictions at forhers.com apply.
On a warm spring night in 1971, two teenagers set out for a party in rural South Dakota, never to be seen again. Their families grew frantic, but law enforcement dismissed their disappearance as teenage rebellion. For decades, the case was plagued by missteps, false leads, and a suspect who was ultimately cleared. Then, in 2013, a state agent retracing the girls' route spotted the undercarriage of a car beneath a bridge near Brule Creek. Inside the girls' belongings and their remains. After 42 years of mystery, the truth emerged, and the discovery that brought a haunting reminder of how close answers have always been. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jolynn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is Sherri and Pam's story. Sherri Miller was born on November 16, 1953, in Vermillion, South Dakota, to Melvin and Helen Miller. Helen married Melvin when she was just 16 years old and gave birth to Sherri's brother, Al, before she was 17. A year later, Sherri's sister, Linda, was born. Sherri grew up in a tumultuous household. Melvin sexually abused Linda and physically abused Helen. Al tried to protect his mother and sisters, but as a child, there was sometimes nothing he could do. By the time Helen was able to escape the abuse, she was a heavy drinker and had a strained relationship with her children. Helen became an absent parent, and Linda had to step up to care for Sherri. By 1961, Helen was in her second abusive marriage, this time with Leonard By. In 1962, Helen and Leonard had a daughter, Rita, and the pattern continued with Sherri being left home alone to care for her new sister. By the late 1960s, the family moved to Beersford, South Dakota, just 30 miles north of Vermillion. It was there Leonard began running the Ritz Ballroom, a popular destination for dancing and roller skating. Sherri attended Beersford High School. In 1970, when she was a sophomore, Leonard's gambling got out of control. He was no longer making enough money to afford the rent, so the family moved back to Vermilion. But Sherri refused to join them. She wanted to finish the school year in Beersford, so she stayed behind and moved in with the grandparents of one of her best friends. Back in Vermilion, Helen and Leonard separated, and Helen began dating a new man. The summer after her sophomore year, Sherri returned to Vermilion, but instead of moving in with Helen and her new boyfriend, she moved in with her grandparents. Sherri quickly managed to make friends in both Beersford High School and Vermilion High School due to her outspoken and outgoing nature. While in school, she was active in the cheer squad and enjoyed baton twirling. Pam Jackson was the youngest child born to Oscar and Adele Jackson, born on January 24, 1954. She was raised in a very conservative, traditional farm family living just outside of Vermilion. Her older brothers, Daryl and Jerry, moved out of state and had their own lives. Her older sister, Kay, lived 135 miles away in Omaha, Nebraska. Since her older siblings were busy with their own lives, Pam was the center of attention at home. Pam attended a small country school through 8th grade, at which point she was the only student in her class. Her freshman year, she began attending Vermilion High School. Pam was active in 4-H, a national youth development organization that is popular in rural areas. The club consists of monthly meetings where kids complete projects such as crafts, baking, sewing, and livestock excavation. May of 1971 was a tough time for Pam. She was hospitalized after becoming ill with mono. Despite that, she wanted to get out into the warmer weather and have fun with her friend Debbie. The two heard of rumors that the seniors were planning a huge keg party on Memorial Day weekend. Pam didn't drink, and this wasn't the sort of thing she normally did, but this time she thought it sounded exciting. She and Debbie made secret plans to hang out at the party. Earlier in the week, however, the plans fell apart. Debbie's family was invited to a Saturday night wedding, and her father insisted she go. Sherri planned to spend her Memorial weekend with her cousin Pam. The two decided they would go to a 9 p.m. movie on Saturday, but as dinner time approached, the phone rang and the girls' plans were jeopardized. On the line was a family member asking for a last-minute babysitter. Sherri understood the importance of Pam's job as both girls were saving money for their road trip after high school graduation, so Sherri encouraged Pam to take the job. Sherri then called Pam Jackson's house, and the girls made plans to attend the party together. At about 8 p.m., Sherri pulled into the Jacksons' driveway in her grandfather's 1960s Studebaker Lark. Sherri and Pam rode around the streets of Vermilion before stopping by Dakota Hospital to visit Sherri's grandmother, Pearl. That year, Sherri's grandmother had been hospitalized with cancer and was bedridden at Dakota Hospital. Sherri visited 3 times a day and became a caretaker for her grandmother. The girls visited with Pearl Jensen until about 9:30 p.m. From there, the girls left to find the party at a secluded country spot known as Lyle's Pits, an active gravel pit 16 miles northeast of Vermilion. Frustrated that they couldn't find the party, Sherri and Pam began driving south, back toward Vermilion. That's when they saw Pat Gale's car parked outside the Gary Owen Church. Mark Lauderman, Steve Glass, and Pat Gale were at the Gary Owen Catholic Church to get disposable cups before heading to the party. They tried giving the girls instructions to find the pits, but after some blank stares, Pat offered to have the girls follow behind them to the party. After driving 3 miles down country roads, Mark, who was sitting in the back seat, turned around and saw the Studebaker's headlights behind him. Pat then missed the driveway for the pits and needed to turn around. As Pat turned the car around, Mark realized the Studebaker was no longer behind them. Pat idled the car for a few minutes as the boys waited, but the Studebaker's headlights never materialized. The boys began to think perhaps the girls saw the turn to the party and took it. Or maybe they had second thoughts about going to this party. Pam's mother, Adele, woke up at 4 a.m. on Sunday and knew something was wrong. She and Pam had a system in place on nights when Pam went out. Adele would leave the kitchen light on, and Pam would turn it off when she got home. Early that morning, the kitchen light was still on, and Pam's bedroom was empty. Adele woke up Oscar and informed him that their daughter hadn't come home. He tried to stay positive and thought Pam had stayed the night with Sherri as the Studebaker wasn't running too well. Adele spoke with Sherri's grandfather, Nick, over the phone, and he told Adele that Sherri hadn't come home either. She was supposed to work that morning at Dakota Hospital, and the staff there had been calling Nick since 7 a.m., wondering where she was. Feeling helpless, Oscar suggested he and Adele go to their Sunday morning church service and pray that Pam would be home when they returned. After church, they anxiously returned home, but Pam still wasn't there. They decided it was time to contact the police. Oscar and Adele drove to Vermilion and found Sherri's mom, Helen, who went with them to the sheriff's office. On May 30th, 1971, when told that the 17-year-olds were missing, Sheriff Nelson only shrugged, saying kids do this all the time and they always come back. Oscar spent the afternoon with a friend driving through the countryside, desperate to find any trace of the girls in the roadside ditches. Meanwhile, Sheriff Nelson was doing nothing to find the girls. One day, in the weeks following the disappearance, Sheriff Nelson stopped by Dakota Hospital. Sherri's coworkers were eager to hear the status of the investigation. Sheriff Nelson just laughed and said, "They've run away, wild teenage girls. They'll be back eventually." Mark, one of the last people known to see the girls alive, was never interviewed by law enforcement. His parents had set up a time for him to talk with Sheriff Nelson, but the sheriff never came. It took 13 days for Sheriff Nelson to take an additional step in trying to find the girls. He filed a warrant for juvenile delinquency so that the other law enforcement agencies would have the authority to stop the girls and bring them back to Clay County. This was one of the few interdepartmental tools available at the time. On July 28, 1971, the 2-year anniversary of Pam and Sherri's disappearance, Adele decided to ask someone other than Sheriff Nelson for help. She wrote a letter to the South Dakota Attorney General listing the reason she felt it was unlikely the girls had run away. Adele explained the frustrations her family had experienced with the investigation. Sheriff Nelson promised the family on day 1 that he would do what he could, but he never even told his deputy about the case, nor did he reach out to the Vermilion police chief. It took nearly a month for the Attorney General to forward Adele's letter to his top investigator, Chief Agent Brule Creek of the Division of Criminal Investigation. Chief Agent Creek assigned the case to Special Agent Patterson, who covered that region of the state. Details about the Studebaker would be entered into the National Crime Information Center, a crime database accessible to law enforcement agencies throughout the country. On August 25, 1971, as soon as he received the inter-office memo regarding his new case, Special Agent Patterson traveled to Vermilion. His first stop was the office of Sheriff Nelson. Agent Patterson asked the sheriff for the Jacksons' address, but the sheriff responded, "I don't know where they live." Agent Patterson was taken aback. Sheriff Nelson was offended that the family went over his head and contacted state authorities. He told Agent Patterson, "I've done all that can be accomplished in this case. If they make any more calls to my office, I'm going to tell them that they called the Attorney General's office, and that office is now responsible for this investigation." Sheriff Nelson was intentionally being unhelpful. Agent Patterson found a new lead in the case. In the summer of 1990, David Lycan was arrested on rape and burglary charges. At his trial, the jury heard a series of horrific encounters with David, as described by his previous partners. David was said to have held one girlfriend hostage for 3 hours and to have beat another when she told him she was pregnant. In November 1990, the jury returned with a guilty verdict after just 5 hours of deliberation. When authorities began investigating the gravel pits in the early 1990s, they brought Steve with them in an attempt to retrace their path. Steve remembered losing the girls as they drove north on Old Highway 77 before they turned east on the unpaved road heading to the gravel pits. They began to wonder if the girls accidentally turned onto the wrong road and ended up at the Lycan farm. David was 16 at the time, a junior at Beersford High School, where Sherri was a classmate for a year. The farm where David grew up was located north of Vermilion, just 5 miles from the Lyle gravel pits Pam and Sherri were trying to find on May 29, 1971. With David Lycan in mind as the only suspect in the disappearance of Pam and Sherri, Special Agent Mike Brule set out to search for the connections between David and the girls. By the mid-1990s, a theory was floating around that David killed Pam and Sherri, but there wasn't much that could be done with the theory as authorities lacked any evidence. Authorities spoke with David's sister Susan, who recalled a suspicious car on the farm when she was a teenager. She described it as a little bigger than a Volkswagen station wagon and parked next to the gas tank at the farm. It was light brown or tan, rounded in the back, and had a big steering wheel. Susan was then shown photographs of different models of 1960s Studebakers, and Susan pointed to the Studebaker Lark, the model belonging to Sherri's grandpa. Susan remembered Sherri lying over the steering wheel of the car and Pam with her head on the passenger window. Susan believed that, even at age 16, David would have been very capable of killing, and his family would have helped him hide the crime. A search warrant was granted, and the Lycan family farm was searched on Tuesday, August 24, 2004. The day before the planned search, investigators interviewed David in hopes of eliciting a confession and David leading them to the correct spot. David admitted he knew the girls, Pam because of their church's affiliation with one another, and Sherri from school. At 10 a.m. on August 24, 2004, the Lycan family was busy on their farm. As Kerwin Lycan was busy pushing cattle across the road from one pen to another, officers asked him what he was doing on May 29, 1971. Kerwin was taken to the Union County Sheriff's Office. While Kerwin was being interrogated in Elk Point, South Dakota, investigators were busy back on the farm. Investigators moved heavy machinery onto the property, including a backhoe, a front loader, and a ground-penetrating radar. Investigators dug 6 trenches about 30 feet long and 10 feet deep next to a machine building, through a garden, in the livestock feedlot, and over the septic tank. Overhead, a DCI agent took thermal imaging photographs from a plane. He noted one particular anomaly near the tree belt surrounding the farm. Kerwin participated in a lie detector test where he was asked questions along the lines of, "Did you kill Pam Jackson and Cheryl Miller? Did you participate in the disappearance of Pam Jackson and Cheryl Miller? And do you know who killed Pam Jackson and Cheryl Miller?" On the police report, it was written, "After careful examination, it is the opinion of this examiner that charts 3 and 4 resulting from this examination reveal significant criteria that indicate deception on the part of Kerwin in answering the above-mentioned questions." On the last full day of the August farm search, Jerry Hansen called the sheriff and said he had information on David. He claimed that in the early 1970s, while drunk and playing cards at a bar in Beersford, David told him Pam and Sherri were buried in the schoolhouse on the Lycan farm. He also remembered seeing a tan Studebaker car on a flatbed trailer at the farm where he worked. Jerry believed the car came from the Lycan farm and was brought there to be hauled away for scrap metal. None of the information Jerry gave the DCI checked out. At noon on Saturday, after more than 4 days of searching, investigators pulled their equipment and left the Lycan farm. The search had been a bust. The cold case unit did not find the remains of Pam or Sherri, and they didn't find the Studebaker. They did not find one shred of evidence that suggested the girls had ever been on the farm. Although the investigators found nothing, they manipulated the public into thinking they had. Attorney General Larry Long immediately told news sources that the evidence they found was promising. 2 weeks later, the investigators filed the search warrant in court. The search warrant receipt listed the items they took, including bones and pieces of painted metal from the dirt floor of the green Quonset, a red purse recovered from the rafters of a house, and bone fragments from a septic tank. Clothing and many photographs were also listed on the inventory. To someone following the case, it sounded like authorities might have found human remains and the personal items belonging to the girls. Attorney General Long told the newspapers that DNA testing on the bones could take months. In reality, the forensic scientist who performed the DNA tests sent his report to the investigators 2 weeks later, telling them the bones came from chickens and cattle. The red purse recovered belonged to the eldest Lycan sibling, Karen, who had a photograph to prove it. The clothing collected by investigators consisted mainly of clothing belonging to the late father, Ike. The photographs seized consisted mostly of Lycan family albums. On September 8, 2004, 12 days after the farm search ended, Sherri's sister-in-law, Mary Ann Miller, agreed to let the DCI put a recording device on her and send her into the South Dakota State Penitentiary in an attempt to get David Lycan to confess. Nothing he told Mary Ann was different from what he had told the cold case investigators 2 weeks prior. When the farm search didn't provide the evidence investigators were hoping to find, and the tipsters failed to direct them to clues, the cold case unit decided to return to David's sister, Susan. They worked with a psychologist that believed he could draw more details from Susan using hypnosis. Susan said the DCI were digging in the wrong spot. The garbage pit was further south than the investigators' excavation site. Susan retraced her steps in 1971 and saw more specific details. She was cleaning inside the machine shed when she heard a loud noise that reminded her of a gunshot. Susan walked out of the shed and saw a car with David nearby. The loud noise came from the direction of the car. As she walked closer, she could see Pam and Sherri inside the car, with Sherri slumped over. Susan said David walked up, faced Susan, then put his hands around Susan's neck. Her next memory was waking up, lying on the ground, with her brother Kerwin standing over and tending to her. The car was gone. The next thing she recalled was seeing an object covered with a tarp. She approached it, lifted the tarp, and saw the bodies of Pam and Sherri in a large wheelbarrow. She could overhear her 3 brothers and father on the porch discussing the disappearance of the girls. Later, when Susan went to do her chores, she said she could see her brothers and father near the barn, but the wheelbarrow and the bodies were gone. She began to cry as she said the bodies were in the feed. As time went on, more details came to surface. Susan now remembered seeing David holding a big gun. Investigators used the new information from Susan to obtain a second search warrant. On Tuesday, November 16, 2004, investigators served the second search warrant. Agents brought a backhoe and skid loader. Desperate to find anything, they dug areas next to the Quonset and even wrapped chains around a playground set and started yanking. For 3 days, investigators dug the cattle yard, but the cold case unit still found nothing. On the 3rd day of the search, Kerwin's sister Barb gave the agents a photograph of a wrecked car belonging to her sister-in-law, Marie Lycan. The vehicle was a 1967 Chevy Impala in a dull gold color, somewhat resembling the tan Studebaker. Marie had moved onto the farm in 1970 and got into an accident in April of that year. The car was towed to the farm and it was parked for 9 years by the shed. Barb thought Susan was confusing Marie's wrecked car with the missing Studebaker and told investigators Susan shouldn't be trusted.
Lowe's knows how to get you ready for holiday hosting with up to 35% off select home decor. And get up to 35% off select major appliances. Plus, members get free delivery, haul away, basic installation, parts, and a 2-year Lowe's protection plan when you spend $2,500 or more on select LG major appliances. Valid through 10/1. Member offer excludes Massachusetts, Maryland, Wisconsin, New Jersey, and Florida. Installed by independent contractors. Exclusions apply. See Lowe's.com for more details.
The case was once against cold, until March 17, 2006, when DCI agents placed a digital recorder on Aloysius Black Crow's right leg. In August 2003, Aloysius Black Crow was transferred to the South Dakota State Penitentiary, where David was being held at the time. Black Crow was given the job as a prison barber, and before long, he reported that while cutting David's hair, the inmate had shared some details about his past crimes. Black Crow claimed he could get David to tell him where Pam and Sherri were buried. Investigators put a wire on Black Crow and told him they needed him to record David saying the things he was reporting. Black Crow begins talking about a 1986 crime in his hometown that he says authorities suspect him of committing. He says he's nervous that he might still be charged. Can't be nervous about it. Tell yourself it didn't happen. If I let all this bother me with my victims, I'd never be able to sleep, David said. Do you remember, a little over a month ago, you told me about what those girls said to you before you did your thing, Black Crow asks. About ready to go meet God? She was at peace with it, David responded. David does not get more specific about the Jackson Miller case, but he adds, if you want to do like me, you just got to keep thinking, I didn't do nothing. I know what I did. I know the people I've taken. I don't think about it. It does not bother me. And if you let it bother you, it's going to drive you crazy. You've got to get some spirituality in your life. Then David speaks a little more directly about the cold case. I know they're coming after me. I know they're after my brother. The guy is going to die, and I'm scared he's going to clear his conscience before he dies. You can't say for sure what a person, when he's dying, is going to do. If he all of a sudden one day wanted to tell them the girls are buried under a sidewalk somewhere and then... He knows they're buried under a sidewalk, Black Crow interrupts. He knows a lot more than he needs to know. He just needs to get on and die. You've got to understand my position. I've got bodies out there they really need to find, and I just don't want to give them up. Although Black Crow was able to get some interesting statements, authorities were hoping for more specifics. So 5 days later, they wired Black Crow up again. This time, David does get more specific. One of my victims was named Sherri. Sherri and Pam, that's her friend. The two of them just riding around. Black Crow asked, when did you decide to raise hell with them? I was a different kid for my age, I never imagined I could do the things I've done to that extreme. I talked them into giving me a ride. I told them I had some money and booze hidden at my dad's farm. If they'd take me out there, I'd give them some money for gas, have a little booze to party on. So we get out there and I tell Pam, come on and help me grab this cash in the barn, She comes inside and I just grab her, and all I wanted to do was have sex. And just thinking about it just does something to me. I just wanted to have sex, and she wouldn't give me the time of day. She thought she was better than I am. I could tell it by the way she talks. She thought she was better than me and implied kiss my ass. I figured she was going to make sure I go to jail. So, to make a long story short, I got what I wanted. Twice, David chuckles. I can't even describe how mad she made me. That bitch bit me. She tried to run, so I put my hands around her fucking neck and ended her existence. I look up and Sherri's standing there in the doorway with this stupid look on her face. David then says his brother Kerwin helped him finish the crimes. They talked about how I buried a whole car. You know how fucking hard it is to bury a car? You can't bury a car. I just buried the bodies. David went on to say he disposed of Sherri's body in a barrel by a gas station in Pipestone, Minnesota, and disposed of the car in a junkyard in Lincoln, Nebraska. On March 30th, 2006, Black Crow made a third recording where David further implicated his brother Kerwin. David was charged with the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Pam Jackson and Sherri Miller. The South Dakota Attorney General's office first assembled this grand jury in Union County a year earlier, on June 28, 2006. In June 2007, grand jury testimony took place without David's knowledge. The jury heard testimony from Pam's parents and David's sister Susan. A month later, the South Dakota Attorney General announced that a grand jury had indicted David on charges of murdering Pam and Sherri. David was transported from the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls to the Union County Courthouse in Elk Point for his first court appearance on July 9, 2007. The defense team brought in Corrections Officer Stephen Baker to listen to the tapes recorded by Aloysius Black Crow. Stephen identified the voice on the tape as Bill Ewitz, not David Lycan. Black Crow failed a lie detector test and finally admitted the other voice on the tape was in fact Bill, not David. The case against David was dropped. With investigators' only suspect being cleared of any involvement, authorities had no other leads to follow up on. The case went cold until 2013. On September 21, 2013, DCI agent Jim Swarenson was reminded of Pam and Sherri's case. He decided to retrace the path Pam and Sherri took on May 29, 1971. As he approached the gravel pits, he noticed all the water had been pumped out. He looked in the pits, but found no trace of the car. He continued on his search, and about 100 yards from the gravel pit entrance, he stopped on the bridge that crossed Brule Creek. He looked over the bridge, and there, staring up at him, was the undercarriage of a car. Investigators arrived on scene and started excavating the car out. They lifted the car enough to look at the license plate, and there it was, the missing tan 1960 Studebaker Lark. The vehicle had barbed wire wrapped around the front axle, and the driver's side headlight and grille were damaged. Inside the car were Pam and Sherri's personal belongings, along with human remains. The remains were sent in to University of South Texas to be identified through DNA. The DNA test definitively concluded the bones belonged to Sherri Miller and Pam Jackson. A mechanic looked at the Studebaker's transmission and said it was in third gear when the car went into the water, meaning the vehicle was traveling at least 40 to 45 miles per hour, indicating the girls were in a crash. There was no reason to think anything other than the car had left the road and flew into the creek. After more than 4 decades, the disappearances of Pam Jackson and Sherri Miller had been solved. Family members were relieved to have answer and closure and felt they were now able to finish the last chapter of this journey. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Sherri and Pam's disappearance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media, and join me next week as I dive into another case.